The candles in the dining room at Aldworth Park had been burning for 3 hours, when Lady Dorothea Aldworth set down her glass and said quite pleasantly that she had a matter of some delicacy to address before the port was poured. Cecily Vane, seated at the far end of the table where companions customarily sat, close enough to be useful, far enough to be forgotten, did not move. She had been waiting for this. She had, in the most precise sense imaginable, arranged for it to arrive. The table held 14. Lord Cavendish sat to Lady Aldworth's left, his florid face arranged in the expression of a man who expects to be entertained. Miss Beatrice Aldworth, the daughter of the house, occupied the seat across from him, her pale gown catching the candlelight with the flattery of expensive silk. 2 county families filled the middle distance. The Reverend Mr. Six Doyle and his wife sat near the foot of the table, selected for their respectability rather than their conversational gifts. And at Cecily's right, occupying the chair that had remained empty through soup and fish and the first remove of meats, sat Edmund Hargreave, the Earl of Ashbourne, who had arrived from the stables 20 minutes into the first course, with mud on his boots, and the air of a man who had debated quite seriously. Not coming in at all. He was very still now. His hand rested flat against the white linen, and Cecily could see the tendons along the back of it. "I have taken the unhappy step," Lady Aldworth continued, her voice carrying the modulated gravity of someone who has rehearsed modulated gravity, "of writing to Miss Vane's references regarding a matter of household property that has come to my attention." The table listened. These things happened in country houses. The fact that they happened at dinner before 14 witnesses was unusual enough to sharpen the room's collective attention to a fine point. Cecily's hands were folded in her lap. Her face was composed. She had learned composure the way other women learned watercolors, as a necessary accomplishment, practiced until it became reflexive, and she called upon it now with the same quiet deliberation she had employed every morning for 6 weeks, from the morning she had first understood what was being built against her. "I have reason to believe," Lady Aldworth said, "that a garnet brooch, a piece of some sentimental value, has gone missing from my jewel case, and that certain other small items from this household have met the same fate." Miss Beatrice looked at the tablecloth. Lord Cavendish's florid face did not change. The Reverend Mr. Doyle cleared his throat. He had not looked at his sister-in-law once since she began to speak. He was looking at Cecily. His eyes, the color of smoke in low light, held something she could not immediately name. It was not. She registered distantly pity. He reached into his coat. Cecily Vane had come to Aldworth Park in the first week of September, at the tail end of the season, when respectable employment was offered to women in her position with the irregularity of good weather, briefly and without warning and at someone else's convenience. She had arrived by hired post-chaise, which she could not quite afford, because the alternative was the mail coach, and she had enough sense left to know that arriving by mail coach would have answered the question of her station before she had opened her mouth. Her situation was plain. She was the only child of Mr. Peed. Arthur Vane, who had been a solicitor of some distinction in Bristol and who had died 8 months earlier, of a constriction of the lungs that had been coming for 3 years and had still managed to arrive as a surprise. He had left her the contents of his library, a moderate sum that would not last the decade, and a small volume of William Cowper's poetry with his own handwriting in the margins, annotations that had nothing to do with Cowper and everything to do with what her father had thought about the world, about justice, about the question of whether a person who perceived accurately was owed anything for that perception. She had read those annotations on the post-chaise. She had read them again in the narrow room assigned to her at Aldworth Park, a room at the back of the house, above the kitchens, which was warm in October, and would be cold by November. She had understood from the moment she arrived that Lady Aldworth had engaged her to be useful, and that useful was a category that did not require her to have opinions or preferences or a future. The household at Aldworth Park was organized around a single purpose, the coming engagement of Miss Beatrice Aldworth to Lord Cavendish. This was not spoken of directly, but it was present in every arrangement of furniture, every selection of guests for dinner, every careful management of Beatrice's conversation to ensure it touched no topic on which she might reveal herself to be either more or less intelligent than a man of Cavendish's temperament would find comfortable. Beatrice was 20 years old, genuinely pretty, and had been told since childhood that she was the diamond of her county. She accepted this as a person accepts the weather without particular analysis of why. Cecily had been at the park 4 days when Edmund Hargreave arrived. She had not known he was expected. No one had mentioned him, which she would later understand was deliberate. Lady Aldworth did not wish her brother-in-law's presence at the park to become a subject of conversation, until she had determined whether it was useful or inconvenient. He arrived on a grey afternoon on horseback, without a carriage, which meant he had come from London without planning to stay long, and had then changed his mind somewhere on the road, or perhaps had not changed his mind so much as run out of alternative destinations. Cecily had been crossing the entrance hall when the door opened. She had time to form one impression before the footman took his hat and coat. He was very large and very tired, and that the tiredness was not of the body. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected, not unkindly, but with the reserve of someone who has decided, as a matter of policy, that unexpected things should be regarded with caution. "You are not Mrs. Pryor," he said. "No," Cecily said. "Mrs. Pryor retired in July. I am Miss Vane, Lady Aldworth's companion." He nodded once as though she had confirmed something he had merely wanted verified, and went to find his sister-in-law. She had thought then that this was the entirety of what he would be to her, a figure passing through a house where she worked, as removed from her daily life as the portraits on the walls. She had been wrong about this, as she had been wrong about other things, but the wrongness had taken its time arriving. Cecily had been at Aldworth Park for 3 weeks when she understood that Lady Aldworth had begun to notice Lord Cavendish. Noticing her, it was not that Cavendish was romantic. He was not. Particularly. He was a man of 50, with a broad estate in Wiltshire, and a settled habit of assessing women the way he assessed horseflesh, with a knowledgeable eye and a commercial understanding of relative value. He had looked at Beatrice Aldworth and found her acceptable. He had looked at Cecily and found her apparently interesting, which was a different and more complicated thing, and Lady Aldworth had observed this distinction within 2 evenings of it emerging. The response was not immediate. Lady Aldworth was not a crude woman. She allowed another week to pass, during which she twice redirected Cavendish's conversation from Cecily to Beatrice with the smoothness of a practiced hostess, and once contrived to seat them at opposite ends of the table at a small informal dinner. Cecily had noticed all of this without remark, because she was not in the habit of remarking on things that were none of her business, and because, in the deepest honest part of herself, she was rather relieved. It was in the morning room, on a Thursday in the 3rd week of October, that Lady Aldworth said what she had been thinking for some time. She was speaking to Beatrice, who sat beside her working embroidery with the patient industry of a girl who has been told that patient industry is one of her charms. Cecily was at the writing table near the window, copying correspondence. "She's nothing but a clever, poor relation," Lady Aldworth said, in the even tone of someone stating a fact about the weather. "Lord Cavendish will see that soon enough. Men of his position always do." Cecily continued to copy. Her pen did not pause. She had been called cleverer things than clever, and worse things than poor. What she had not yet known at that moment was that Lady Aldworth had already moved past dismissal into something more precise. The library at Aldworth Park was Edmund's habitual refuge, which meant it was, by default, a room Cecily entered rarely, and only in the mornings when he was elsewhere. She had not intended to alter this arrangement. On the Thursday of the 4th week, Lady Aldworth dispatched her to retrieve a volume of botanical illustration that Lord Cavendish wished to consult, and the library was the last place it had been seen. Edmund was at the desk when she entered. He did not look up. She found the volume in 12 seconds. She was leaving when he said without preamble, "You read Cowper." She stopped. "You had his volume at dinner last Tuesday," he said. "The corner of it was visible in your pocket. The green boards." "My father's copy," she said. "The poems, or the letters?" "The poems." Though he preferred the letters, he wrote in the margins. Edmund looked up then. His face in the library's gray morning light was stripped of the formal composure she had seen it maintain at dinner and at the occasional breakfast when their hours overlapped. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been cold for a long time, and was not entirely certain. He remembered how warmth had felt. "Cowper went mad," Edmund said. It was not clear whether this was a warning or a recommendation. "And then he recovered," Cecily said. Mostly. He held her gaze for one moment longer than was comfortable. Then he looked back at his papers, and she left. The Cowper was still in her pocket. She did not think of him again until the following afternoon, when she took Mrs. Hartwell into the kitchen garden to read to her. Mrs. Hartwell had been housekeeper at Aldworth Park for 22 years. She was 71, wide to the hips, and had eyes that were failing with the slow patience of candlelight guttering down. She would not admit this, because to admit it would be to give Lady Aldworth occasion to pension her, and Mrs. Hartwell was not yet finished. She managed by memory and by the assistance of those she trusted, and she had decided, in the careful way of a woman who had spent decades reading the difference between useful people and decorative ones, that she was the former. Cecily read to her for an hour most afternoons. She had begun doing this without arrangement or announcement. She had simply appeared with a book one day when Mrs. Hartwell's eyes were giving her trouble, and the household accounts required checking, and she had read them aloud, and they had continued from there. Mrs. Hartwell never thanked her directly. This was one of the things Cecily liked about her. On the afternoon of the 28th of October, Cecily read from the Cowper. While the kitchen garden dried in a thin autumn sun, Hartwell sat on the stone bench with her hands folded and her eyes closed, because the light bothered them. She was halfway through the third poem when she became aware that someone was standing at the garden gate. She did not stop reading. She finished the poem. Then she closed the book on her finger and looked. Edmund stood at the gate with his hat in his hand and his coat collar turned up against the October air. He had been there for some time. She could not have said how she knew this, only that his posture had the quality of something settled. He met her eyes. Neither of them spoke. Mrs. Hartwell said, without opening hers, "There are 2 cups, my lord, if you should like tea." Edmund looked at the old woman, then back at Cecily. His jaw moved once as though he were resolving something. "I would," he said. He came through the gate and sat on the bench's far end, and Cecily read one more poem, and the 3 of them sat in the thin October sun, and nothing in particular was said about any of it. That evening, without explanation or address, a foot warmer arrived outside Cecily's door. She did not ask whose instruction it had come from. She already knew. If you find yourself holding your breath over a woman you do not yet know is the heroine of her own story, you are in good company. Stay close. Cecily found the letter on the first morning of November. She had been sent to Lady Aldworth's writing room to retrieve the household menus for the week, which her employer had promised to the cook before noon. The menus were not on the writing desk. Cecily opened the middle drawer, where such papers were sometimes pushed in haste, and found, between a letter from Lady Aldworth's solicitor and an invitation to a hunt breakfast, a sealed envelope addressed in Lady Aldworth's hand to Mr. Fortune. Daniel Forsyth, solicitor, Bristol. She recognized the name. Mr. Forsyth had been her father's partner for 11 years. She ought not to have opened it. She was fully aware of this. She opened it anyway. The letter was 4 paragraphs. Its language was measured, regretful in register, and meticulous in its accusations. It described a garnet brooch, missing from Lady Aldworth's jewel case since September. It described 2 other small items, a snuff box and a silver letter opener, which had also vanished without explanation. It expressed Lady Aldworth's grief at being compelled to share this information, given her genuine warmth toward Miss Vane and the unfortunate circumstances of her situation. It concluded by questioning whether any future employer who consulted Mr. Forsyth might be appraised of these irregularities. In the interest of transparency, Cecily read it twice. Then she sat down in Lady Aldworth's chair because her knees had registered the blow before the rest of her caught up. She had been in this house for 8 weeks. She had taken nothing. She had taken nothing because she was not a thief, but also because she was not a fool. And she had understood from the first week that a woman in her position could not afford the smallest irregularity, the most innocent borrowing, the most unintentional displacement of any object. She had been careful with the exactitude of a woman who knows she cannot afford to be careless. She looked at the letter for a long time. She thought about burning it. She thought about leaving. She thought about everything she did not have. If she left, the sum her father had left her would sustain her through the winter and not beyond it, and a letter of this kind sent to the one reference she possessed would close every door in Bristol, in Bath, in London, in the county. She would be not merely poor, but unplannable, a word her father had used for the kind of problem that could not be solved by effort alone. Then she thought about what the letter actually was. It was a prepared accusation, sealed and addressed and ready for the post. It had not been sent. It had been held, which meant Lady Aldworth intended to send it at a moment of her choosing when the leverage it represented was most useful. It was not, yet, a disaster. It was an instrument of one. Cecily unsealed it with the letter opener that had allegedly gone missing. She drew out the page. At the bottom, below Lady Aldworth's signature, she added 3 lines in her own hand, small and precise. A date, the names of Mrs. Hartwell and Mr. Prentice the steward, and the notation that these individuals had been present in the household for the duration of the period in question and could speak to the contents of the house's rooms during that time. Then she refolded the letter, resealed it as well as she was able, and returned it to the drawer beneath the solicitor's letter, exactly as she had found it. She brought the menus to the cook. She went about her day. She did not tell anyone what she had done, and she did not alter her behavior in any particular that Lady Aldworth might observe. She simply waited, in the way that a woman who has grown up reading margins learns to wait, with her whole intelligence pointed at what is coming and her face showing nothing at all. 2 days later, Lady Aldworth entertained a small party in the drawing-room, 8 or 10 of the county, and Lord Cavendish was among them. Cecily sat near the fire, working on mending that required the good light. Lady Aldworth drifted, as she habitually drifted, toward wherever Lord Cavendish's conversation had settled. "She is nothing but a clever poor relation," she heard her say to the small group assembled near the mantelpiece, her voice light and confiding as a woman sharing the ordinary observation of a practical life. "I am fond of her. Naturally. A companion is a companion. I should not like Lord Cavendish to mistake her situation for something other than it is." Cavendish, who was not in fact a stupid man, looked once in Cecily's direction with the expression of a man reconsidering a social calculation. Then he turned toward Beatrice, who was at that moment playing something agreeable at the pianoforte, and found that the calculation had, on reflection, been reconsidered satisfactorily. Cecily knotted her thread and cut it. She began on the next seam. She had at that point been waiting 11 days. On the 16th of November, Mrs. Tweed. Hartwell found Cecily in the servants' passage at the back of the house and said, in the flat voice of someone reporting a thing they have not decided whether to be angry about, "She has told Mr. Prentice that you have been seen removing items from the linen press without authorization. She told him this morning, in front of the head housemaid." Cecily was still. "He came to me afterward," Mrs. Hartwell said. "He did not look well. He knows what is being built, miss. He saw where the brooch came from, and it was not from your room." Cecily looked at the old woman. "Will he say so?" Mrs. Hartwell folded her hands. "He is afraid. He has been in this house for 12 years. He is not a wicked man. He is only a cautious one, and I believe he has reached the end of caution." That evening she told Cecily what had been said in the morning room 3 weeks ago now. The exact words delivered in Mrs. Hartwell's dry voice, with a sorrow underneath them that the voice did not permit to surface. Nothing but a clever, poor relation. "I know," Cecily said. Mrs. Hartwell looked at her. "What will you do?" "Nothing," Cecily said. "I have already done it." She had not known then that Edmund would speak to Prentice that same evening. She had not known that Prentice, reaching the end of 12 years of caution in one long, careful conversation with a man who listened without theater, would tell him what he had seen. A small red brooch removed from Lady Aldworth's jewel case by Lady Aldworth herself, placed in the drawer of Cecily's washstand on the 29th of October, 2 weeks before the dinner at which it was scheduled to be mourned. She had not known that Mrs. Blank Hartwell, who had pieced this together in her own methodical way over a longer span of time, had that same afternoon gone to the old jewelry cabinet and opened the rosewood compartment that Lady Aldworth believed was private, and found the brooch in its original velvet nest, returned there after its purpose, as evidence had been determined to be better served at a dinner table than in a drawer. She had not known any of this. She had simply placed the names on the letter and waited. There was a portrait of Edmund's first wife in the study at Aldworth Park, a small oil in a walnut frame, hung between the two windows, rather than above the mantel, which was where portraits of consequence customarily resided. Cecily had noticed it on her third day in the house and not remarked on it, because it was not her place to remark on it, and because the woman in the portrait had the calm, composed face of someone who had made peace with being observed, and the portrait felt private in a way that the public rooms did not. She found Edmund standing before it on the evening of the 14th of November, 2 days before the dinner party. She had come to the study for a dictionary. Her employer had requested and had not expected to find the room occupied. She stood in the doorway, and he turned at the sound of her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "I am sorry," Cecily said. "I was sent for the dictionary. I will come back." "It is on the second shelf," Edmund said. He did not move. He looked back at the portrait with the expression of a man who has had this conversation with himself many times. She found the dictionary. She ought to have gone. She did not, quite yet, go. "Her name was Clara," Edmund said. "She died in the spring of last year." "I was in London." "I know," Cecily said quietly. "I had heard. I was in London because I had a speech to give in committee." His voice was even, stripped of inflection the way a surface is stripped when enough weather has passed over it. "It was about drainage rights. I believed it was important." "Was it? The amendment passed?" "Yes, I suppose it was." He was quiet. "She had a fever for 6 days before she died. I received the letter 3 days after." Cecily stood with the dictionary in her hands and did not look away from him, because looking away would have been a form of politeness she did not think he was asking for. "You could not have known," she said. "No." He turned from the portrait. His eyes, meeting hers across the dim room, held something that was neither plea nor accusation. "I have been told this by several people who mean, well, it does not resolve the fact that I was not here." "No," Cecily agreed. "It does not." He looked at her with something shifting in his face, a quality of attention that recalibrated slightly, as though she had given an answer he had not expected and was not certain what to do with. "She would have thought the drainage rights were important too," Cecily said. "Probably." The silence held for a long moment. Then, something in the rigid economy of his shoulders altered. The smallest possible degree, as though a rope under tension had eased by the width of a thread. "She was practical," he said. "She would have been the first to tell me to go." "Then perhaps," Cecily said with care, "what you are carrying is not only guilt, but the particular misery of knowing that she would have released you from it, and not being able to release yourself." He looked at her. She had said too much. She had said what she actually thought, which was a habit her father had encouraged and which the world had spent 24 years attempting to discourage. "I am sorry," she began. "I should not have said it." "No," Edmund said. He was looking at her with the full intensity of a man who has spent 14 months not looking at anything. "You should not apologize for saying a true thing." She left. She carried the dictionary to Lady Aldworth, and she went to her small room above the kitchen, and she sat for a very long time with her father's cowper in her hands, and did not open it. The dinner party on the 16th of November was the last autumn gathering of the season, before the county families retreated to London for winter, and Lady Aldworth had arranged it with the deliberate elegance of a woman who understands that occasion is a form of architecture. The table was set for 14. The flowers were late chrysanthemums from the kitchen garden. The candles were beeswax, which meant the light was warm and golden and flattering to everyone at the table, a fact that could not be incidental. Edmund arrived from the stables 20 minutes late, as was apparently his custom, and took the chair to Cecily's right, without explanation or apology, which was also his custom. He had come in from riding. His cheeks held cold air. He did not look at her, but she was aware of him in the way she had been aware of him for 3 weeks now, with the specific involuntary precision of a compass needle that has found north, and cannot pretend otherwise. She watched him accept a glass of wine from the footman, and set it down untouched. His hand rested on the linen. She had wondered, in the days before the dinner, how the evening would go. She had not arranged its particulars. She had only declined to prevent them. What Lady Aldworth chose to do with her prepared instrument was Lady Aldworth's choice. What Cecily had done was ensure that the instrument, if deployed, would surface what had been concealed beneath it. The port had not yet been poured. Lady Aldworth set down her glass and said quite pleasantly that she had a matter of some delicacy to address. The room arranged itself around her, as rooms did when Lady Aldworth wished them to. Lord Cavendish leaned an inch closer. Beatrice looked at the tablecloth. The Reverend Mr. Doyle cleared his throat. Lady Aldworth spoke of the brooch. She spoke of the other small items. She expressed her grief with graceful precision. Cecily's hands were folded in her lap. Her face was composed. She waited. Edmund's hand, which had been flat against the linen, turned over once, unhurried, as though he were examining his own palm. Then he reached into his coat. "I wonder," he said, in the level, unhurried voice of a man who never raises it, "if you might tell me on what date he wrote to Miss Vane's reference." The table stilled. Lady Aldworth looked at him with the careful attention of someone who has been interrupted by a minor earthquake and is deciding how to respond. "The 29th of October, she said. "I was reluctant to act sooner, I see." Edmund placed 2 papers on the white linen beside his plate. He did not unfold them. He placed them with the methodical care of a man laying down cards in a game whose outcome he has already calculated. Mr. Carb. "Prentice, my late brother's steward, came to speak with me yesterday evening. He was in Miss Vane's room on the 29th of October, replacing a window latch that had been reported loose. He has set down in writing what he observed in that room and what he observed introduced into it and by whom." The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet in which individual candle flames could be heard to move. Lady Aldworth's fan, which she had been holding at the measured and habitual angle of her station, had not moved. Her face had not moved either. There was something happening behind her eyes that Cecily recognized, with the steadiness of someone who has been waiting for it, as the internal recalculation of a plan discovering its own error. Additionally, Edmund said, "Mrs. Ederai Hartwell, who has served this household for 22 years, and whom I believe everyone at this table knows to be a woman of uncommon integrity, brought this to me this afternoon." He placed the brooch on the table. It was small and dark red, and it sat on the white linen and caught the candlelight with the indifference of a small object that has no opinion about the use to which it has been put. "She found it in your rosewood cabinet, Dorothea." Lady Aldworth said Edmund, and then she did not say anything further. Her fan had lowered by degrees to her lap. "Miss Vane added a notation to your letter," Edmund said, still in the level voice. "She added the names of the witnesses in this house who could speak to the truth of matters. She did not send the letter elsewhere. She did not bring this to me. She did not bring it to Cavendish, or to the Reverend, or to any person at this table. She put it back in your desk and she waited, and she continued her work." He looked at Lady Aldworth for a long moment, and his face held something that was not anger, not quite, but was its near neighbor, compressed and cold as stone. "She prepared the truth to surface when you chose to bring the lie into this room. And you have now brought it." Miss Beatrice Aldworth was looking at her mother. It was not precisely betrayal on her face, it was something younger and more bewildered. The expression of a girl who has been told her whole life that the script is the world, and has just discovered that the script was written by a person. Lord Cavendish had set down his glass. Edmund stood. 14 people watched him, and the room held its breath, because when a man of his frame and composure stands in a room and nothing is moving in him except the thing at the center, the room understands that something final is being decided. "She is my countess," he said. "I will not hear her name spoken otherwise." 12 words, level and irrevocable as a door closed from the inside. Lady Aldworth looked at him across the table. Her mouth opened once, and then closed, and then she said in a voice that had lost its rehearsed register entirely, "Edmund, I believe," Edmund said, "that Lord Cavendish may wish to offer his regrets for the remainder of the evening. And I think, Dorothea, that we will speak in the morning, when the room is smaller and the account can be made." Honestly, he looked at Cecily. She had been holding herself very still, in the way she had held herself still for weeks, for months, for years. The posture of a woman who has learned that stillness is the only sovereignty available to her. His eyes were on her face, and they were not asking her to be still. They were asking something else entirely. Something she had no formal category for, and her body registered it before her mind could manage the translation. A warmth beginning at the base of her throat and spreading, unhurried, to the places she had not permitted anyone to reach. She stood. Edmund offered his arm. She took it, because it was offered, and because she was, for the first time in a very long while, permitted to take what was offered. They left the dining room of Aldworth Park together, and behind them the candles continued to burn, and 14 people sat with the truth laid out on the white linen between them, and no one reached for the port. The formal announcement was made on the 20th of November. In a letter, Edmund composed himself and dispatched to the Morning Post. He showed it to Cecily before he sealed it. She read it once. "You have spelled Vane correctly," she said. "I was careful," he said. She wrote to Mr. Forsyth the following morning. She told him about the employment at Aldworth Park, and about its conclusion, and about the engagement to Lord Ashbourne. And she asked him, if he should hear anything from Lady Aldworth regarding her character, to return the letter unopened. She was precise in her language, as her father had taught her, and she was brief, as her father had also taught her, and she folded the letter and addressed it and felt, for the first time, that she was writing from a place that had walls and a floor. Lady Aldworth removed herself to the Dower House in the 3rd week of November, accompanied by Beatrice, who had said very little after the dinner party, except to ask Cecily in the passage on the morning after, whether she had known this would happen. "I hoped the truth would surface," Cecily said. "I could not know when." Beatrice looked at her for a long moment. She was 20 years old and prettier than she needed to be, and had been handed a script she had not written, and she was beginning, slowly and at some cost, to consider whether she wished to continue with it. "I am sorry," Beatrice said, "for all of it. I am sorry I did not stop it." "You did not know how," Cecily said. "That is not the same as not caring." It was the kindest thing she could offer. She did not know whether Beatrice deserved more. Prentice remained in his post. Edmund had made clear, in the quiet manner of a man whose quiet is self-evidently non-negotiable, that a decent man who had eventually told the truth would not be penalized for his cowardice in the interim. Mrs. Patience Hartwell had received a written acknowledgment of her 22 years of service, in Edmund's own hand, which she had folded and placed in her apron pocket and said nothing about, because she was not a woman who required ceremony in order to feel the thing the ceremony represented. The household reconfigured itself, in the days after Lady Aldworth's departure, with the quiet efficiency of a place returning to its own nature. Edmund took up permanent residence, which he had not done since his brother's death, 4 years earlier. He managed the estate in the mornings and was present at dinner in the evenings, And Cecily found that the rhythms of the house, which had been organized for weeks around the project of her destruction, now organized themselves around something warmer and more ordinary. They had not yet kissed. They were engaged, formally and in the public record, and they sat together at the dinner table and walked the grounds in the afternoons, and occasionally in the library, occupied the same room with books and a fire and the particular silence of two people who have said the important things and are now comfortable in what remains. They had not yet kissed, and Cecily was aware of this the way she was aware of an unlocked door. She had not yet decided to open, not anxiously but with attention. It happened on the evening of the 24th, which was 3 days before the date on which Edmund had said, in front of 14 witnesses, that she would be his countess. They were in the library. The fire had burned low. Edmund was at the desk with the estate accounts, which he managed with the systematic attention of a man who had learned, at considerable cost, not to confuse absence for trust. Cecily was near the window with the Cowper, reading by the last of the evening light, and when the light finally failed, she set the book on the sill and looked out at the dark garden. She heard him close the ledger. She heard his chair shift. She heard in the silence of the room the space between them change its nature. When she turned, he was close enough that the warmth of him reached her before she had registered the movement. "Cecily," he said. It was the first time he had said her name without her surname accompanying it, and it landed in the quiet room with the specific weight of a deliberate thing. His hands came to her face, careful and certain all at once, and she did not move away because she did not wish to move away. And he bent his head and kissed her with the unhurried precision of a man who has thought about this moment and intends to do it justice. She reached up and held the lapel of his coat in both fists, because her knees had remembered what the rest of her had been managing, and she held on, and the fire snapped once in its grate, and outside the window the first frost of winter was settling into the kitchen garden, and the bare rose canes and the stone bench where Mrs. Blang. Hartwell sat in afternoons when he lifted his head. She was breathing carefully. "I should have said your name weeks ago," Edmund said. His voice, very near, was stripped of everything except what it actually was. "You were being careful," Cecily said. "I was being a coward," Edmund said. "I am familiar with the distinction," she smiled. It was the expression she kept for things that were true and rueful and not without warmth, which was the expression her father had most liked on her face and which she had not had much occasion to wear at Aldworth Park. "Then perhaps," she said, "you have now reached the end of caution." He laughed. It was a small sound, new and slightly unused, like a room opened after a long winter. She thought she might like to hear it often. The engagement was confirmed before a solicitor on the 27th of November, in a room in the neighboring market town with Mrs. Hartwell and Mr. Prentice as witnesses. Edmund signed his name in a clear, deliberate hand, and then watched Cecily sign hers beside it, and when she lifted the pen, there was a satisfaction in his face that was not triumph, but was something quieter and more durable than triumph, the particular relief of a man who has stopped arguing with what he wants. They returned to Aldworth Park in Edmund's carriage in the late afternoon, as the light began its early winter retreat behind the tree line, and Cecily sat with her father's Cowper in her hands, and looked at the annotations in his careful handwriting, and thought about what he had believed about justice, about the slowness of it, about the question of whether accuracy was ever ultimately rewarded. Yes, she thought, the park coming into view through the carriage window, the gray stone warm with lamplight and the falling dark. Yes, eventually, her own room at Aldworth Park was being cleared for the use of future household staff. She was to have the larger room at the front of the house, the one with 2 windows looking east with good morning light, and space enough for a proper bookshelf. She set the Cowper on the windowsill of that room on the evening of the 27th, open to the poem she had been reading to Mrs. Hartwell when Edmund stood at the kitchen garden gate with his hat in his hand. The annotations in her father's writing were visible on the page, not any particular line, but the whole dense, patient record of a man thinking through what he believed. Edmund came to stand behind her. He looked at the book. "Leave it there," he said. I intended to, she said. The lamp was lit on the table. Outside the window, the frost was silver in the grass, and the moon had risen clear and cold over the park. And the kitchen garden below was dark and still and full of the bare canes and the stone bench and the quiet of a house that had at last been returned to what it was. If Cecily's particular patience moved you, if her way of holding the truth until it was ready to surface felt like something you have known, leave a word in the comments. And thank you for staying until the very end.